The U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging will now come to order. Today, we are gathered to highlight the importance of disaster preparedness. Natural disasters do not discriminate. It doesn't matter how old you are, how much money you have, or how smart you think you might be. If you aren't prepared, nothing else matters. And while being prepared is vital for everyone, it is especially important for seniors who often have different and more complex needs than their younger neighbors and friends. As a senior senator from Florida, I'm no stranger to disasters. During my 8 years as governor and 6 years serving Floridians in the U.S. Senate, I've seen the destruction left behind by multiple devastating hurricanes in the Sunshine State. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's that preparedness saves lives. There is no alternative to getting prepared and having a disaster plan. When disasters strike, the things around us can be replaced, but if you don't protect your life, there is no second chance. I tell Floridians constantly during hurricane season, you can rebuild your home, but you cannot rebuild your life. I cannot tell you how many Floridians I have talked to that barely survived hurricanes and wish they would have done more to be prepared. I've also talked to heartbroken families that lost a loved one who didn't take these storms seriously. I'll never forget talking to a young man in Mexico Beach, which is in our panhandle, the day after Hurricane Michael made its devastating landfall there in 2018. He was frantically searching for his elderly mother, who had stayed in her home on the beach to ride out the storm. Because he said, he tried to get her to evacuate, but she said, oh, I've lived here forever, and nothing's going to happen. Unfortunately, that young man wouldn't find his mom until days later. She'd been swept away by the massive storm surge and didn't survive. It breaks your heart to hear these stories. She should still be alive today. My hope is that our hearing today will motivate older Americans to take disaster preparedness seriously. Hurricane season is just weeks away, and being prepared saves lives. Being from Florida, it's no surprise that most of my experience with disasters has come from responding to hurricanes. But it's not just storms that folks need to prepare for. We all have seen devastating wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters impact our country. We have to remember that disaster can strike at any moment. That is why being prepared and having a plan is so important, especially for our aging population who face unique challenges. Older Americans are disproportionately affected by natural disasters. In Florida, nearly 60% of the deaths from Hurricane Ian were seniors. So if you're a senior, if you have loved ones who are seniors, or anyone watching this right now, go to ready.gov and see what you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared to make a plan. That includes having an evacuation plan and knowing what to do if you must leave your home. You should also make sure to stock up on emergency supplies like food, water, first aid supplies. For our seniors especially, a really important part of this is making sure to have medications. You have to make sure you have a plan that ensures you have enough medicine to last a week. There's so many things to think about, but when you have a plan in place and get prepared in advance, it's so much easier and less stressful than trying to get everything done with a storm barreling through the Atlantic or Gulf of America. I'm so glad to have the witnesses before us today and have them share their expertise and experience. Listen to them. It could very well be the difference in saving your life should disaster strike. Don't put your family and your loved ones at risk. Don't wait to take actions. Get prepared today. Now I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, for calling today's hearing. This is an urgent and important issue, and one that our state knows really quite well. Natural disasters are dangerous for everyone, but we know they're especially dangerous for older adults and people with disabilities. Research shows that people with disabilities are up to 4 times more likely to die in a disaster than a general population, and that older adults are more likely to die in a disaster than any other demographic. When Hurricane Sandy struck New York in 2012, nearly all the fatalities were people over the age of 65. In February 2021, when a winter storm struck Jacksonville, Texas, 60% of the 246 deaths were people over the age of 60. We know the risks and we know the statistics, and it's our responsibility to plan accordingly. Older adults are much more likely to have a disability than the general population, which may impact their mobility, sensory processing, or cognitive function. We must develop accessible shelters and transportation, accessible alerts in multiple languages, and plan for relocating people who live in long-term care facilities before disaster strikes, not after. That's one of the reasons why I introduced my strategic plan for aging in the 118th Congress, and I plan to reintroduce it again in this Congress. My bill would create a new nationwide grant program under the Older Americans Act to incentivize and support states' efforts to create their own strategic plans for aging, which would include disaster preparedness as part of it. In addition to planning, we have to also make sure that state and local governments are properly resourced to build accessibility into their disaster recovery and response. That means safeguarding federal resources like those provided through FEMA or the Administration for Community Living. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about solutions to improve outcomes for older adults and people with disabilities during disasters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gillibrand. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today, all of whom bring important perspectives on the challenges facing the elderly when it comes to preparing for a disaster. First, I'd like to recognize Sheriff Chris Naco from Pasco County. In 2011, when I was governor of Florida, I appointed him to serve as sheriff. He was elected to the position in 2012, then reelected without opposition in 16, 20, and 24. Had all of them, 12, 16, 20, 20, yeah, a lot of them. When it comes to this, I think I had, and when I was governor, I had the opportunity to appoint a sheriff if there was an opening, and I think Chris was the first one I got to. When it comes to disaster preparedness, the sheriff is an expert. Just last year, the Gulf Coast of Florida was severely hit by hurricanes. The sheriff and I have worked closely in response last year and throughout my years as senator and governor to make sure the residents of Pasco County are safe, prepared for anything that may impact them. The sheriff and his deputies are always working to make sure their community is prepared for any emergency and ready to respond if disaster strikes. Thank you for being here today and look forward to hearing your testimony. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the Special Committee on Aging for inviting me to speak before you today. My name is Chris Naco, and I have the distinct honor of serving as a sheriff of Pasco County, Florida, a county just north of Tampa Bay on Florida's Gulf Coast, with a population of roughly 750,000, with 22% of that population being 65 years or older. I'd be remiss if I did not know today, as the senator said, that Senator Rick Scott appointed me sheriff. Senator Rick Scott, when he was governor of Florida, guided our state through unprecedented storms and hurricane seasons, and the impact he left on preparedness, execution, public-private partnerships, and emergency response is still saving lives and property in Florida today. I'd also be remiss to not note the outstanding partnership that we had with another one of your committee members, Senator Ashley Moody, who was Florida's Attorney General. Senator Moody was a leader in scam prevention, price gouging, unlicensed contracting, and other issues that impacted all of Florida citizens, but especially our senior population, as they both prepare and recover from hurricanes. With that, over the last year, our Pasco County community faced in short succession the threat of Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Milton. With more than 24 miles of coastline, Pasco County has unique challenges from the storms, even though none of them made direct landfall in Pasco County. As Debbie and Helene moved north through the Gulf of America, within 100 miles of Pasco County's coast, storm surge was pushed ashore, greatly impacting the more than 50,000 residents of Pasco County who live west of US 19. This area of our county is home to many seniors and has direct impact on them. In the overnight hours of September 25th and 26th, as the Hurricane Helene moved north just off of our coastline, I joined members of our sheriff's office along with Pasco Fire Rescue, and we conducted active water rescue. We were also joined by the Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard, whose assistance was invaluable. In those overnight hours, we were able to rescue more than 100 people from rapidly rising storm surge, which ultimately crested at near record levels. Anecdotally, we were told by the National Guard that they had a vehicle rated for 18 feet of water that was unable to pass any further, encountering water in one of our neighborhoods. I myself witnessed individuals who had climbed on roofs to avoid the rapidly rising storm surge. In one instance, a female, her small child, and elderly relatives had climbed to a roof of a 3-story multifamily housing unit and were awaiting rescue. This speaks directly to the need to follow local emergency management officials and orders, such as evacuation, especially for the most vulnerable among our community. That is furthered by another example of a water rescue call for service we received in a hurricane in 2023. And when we responded to the elderly couple with a boat to rescue them from their rapidly flooding house, they were not prepared and still needed to gather various medications and their family pets. We encourage everyone, if you do not heed local evacuation orders, be prepared to go when make the decision or risk life as well as the lives of first responders, waiting for preparation to occur when rapidly rising flow waters is not feasible for any party involved. In these instances, our first priority is life and safety and rescue. As you can imagine, all resources we have become involved in these rescue operations. Even with that, without the support of the National Guard, Coast Guard, Florida State Guard, and Florida Fish and Wildlife, we would not have been as successful as we were. The resources that the state and federal partnerships, such as the National Guard and Coast Guard, can bring with them to these disaster response situations is invaluable for local communities, such as Pasco County. Hurricane Milton, which impacted our community in October of last year, presented a different challenge as Milton made landfall south of Tampa Bay. We did not immediately see large impacts. However, as Milton moved through the center of our state in a northern direction, dropping rain on already saturated rivers and other bodies of water, riverine flooding became a significant issue. Several days after Milton made landfall, the facing record of flooding on several rivers in Pasco County, we were called for several rescues, especially in the neighborhoods in Wesley Chapel. Again, with the assistance of our state and federal partners, this rescue operation would not have been as successful. Let me state as, in my opinion, that law enforcement emergency response must continue to advance and embrace rapidly evolving technologies. Items such as drones provide invaluable benefits to disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Our partnerships with Skydio and with Axon have led us to believe that drone technology is assisting us and helping to save lives in our community. With that being said, I know my information is going into the record. I appreciate your time, but I most importantly want to thank our citizens for all their support, the first responders in Tampa Bay, all the people that are out there, power linesmen, those that are in the gas supply industry, they are critically necessary. And the last thing and most importantly is our Lord Jesus Christ. And I ask him to protect us in this hurricane season.
Thanks, Sheriff. So the sheriff has the way what they've done in Pasco County, which is just north of Tampa, but also the whole area. The sheriff's departments, the police departments, the fire departments, all the first responders, they do an unbelievable job of coordinating all their activities and sharing resources, and you guys do a great job. So congratulations. Next, Red Cross. I had the opportunity to work with Red Cross. When I was governor, I had 4 big hurricanes, I had flooding, I had tornadoes, so I had it all. And what's great is if the Red Cross shows up. They've helped us. They helped us with our shelters. They fed a lot of people. They've opened up healthcare facilities. They've just done an unbelievable job. So our next witness is Jennifer Pippa, Vice President of Disaster Programs for the American Red Cross. Prior to this role, Mrs. Pippa served as CEO of George's Red Cross and previously served as the regional executive for the Red Cross of Central Florida. Her Red Cross career began in 2004 when she was 4 years old, when she joined the Disaster Action Team in Raleigh, North Carolina as a volunteer. Thank you for being here today. I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you for the age adjustment. I appreciate that, Senator. Good morning, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the privilege of being able to testify before you today on behalf of the American Red Cross. We commend the committee on holding a much-needed hearing on the unique challenges that face older Americans and how to help them prepare better for disasters. Amongst the most significant challenges the American Red Cross encounters in our disaster work is meeting the needs of older Americans that are impacted by disasters. Nearly 20% of Americans are in that 65 and older age group, and the current growth population shows that just growing more and more as we continue on. This increase in population in older Americans comes at a time when we are having more frequent and more costly disasters. So when this is happening, and that's becoming our new normal, and we're seeing this age demographic and this maturity population, the intersection of these two are absolutely a critical moment in time. I want to share a personal experience I had actually in Florida after Hurricane Ian. I was out after the first couple of days driving around. We were making sure people knew where our shelters were, that we had meals, that they could connect with us so that we could help them navigate the complex recovery environment. And as I drove by, there was this woman. She was in her home, kind of sifting through things. And when you looked in through the windows, it was like someone had taken her home and just shaken it up. So the refrigerator was in the middle of the kitchen, the couches and the bookcases were piled on the side. And she was going through her stuff. She was trying to move stuff. She was trying to find stuff. So I went inside, I introduced myself to her. Her name is Jackie. So she was a retired home economics teacher from upstate New York. And once she had retired, her and her husband chose to move down to Fort Myers, Florida. She had done everything right. She had listened to the warnings. She was weather aware. When the officials told her to evacuate, she and her husband evacuated. But she still lost her home. And when she returned and I was talking to her, I was asking her about her neighbors because she was so proud of the neighborhood and everyone that she knew in it. This was her entire life. This was her social fabric at that moment in time. And what she told me was there were some people who chose not to evacuate. In fact, one of her neighbors unfortunately lost his life because he hadn't. She's this incredibly intelligent, well-articulated woman, and you know that she's got a road here ahead of her that's going to be really tough, but she's one of those folks where you think, I know she's going to be able to do this. I have faith that she's going to be able to navigate this. In continuing to talk to her in the days and weeks afterwards, here's what Jackie reminded me of. The disaster never lets her forget that she was now a victim of it, that her life is immeasurably changed because of the impact of that disaster. Simple things that you and I take for granted every single day, like what grocery store to go to, or I need to make an appointment with my local doctor or my local bank, she's forced to make new decisions. It's not a choice she made. It is a choice that was forced upon her. And now she has to renegotiate what the rest of her retirement is going to look like with her husband because she unfortunately was impacted from a disaster. We know folks, as they get older, they rely on that repeatable, sustainable, stable infrastructure so that they can continue to live independently but still be able to take care of themselves. And what disasters do is they strip our population of that ability. It takes away that autonomy. It takes away the empowerment to make those choices and forces them down a road that was not of their choosing. And we see this in older Americans time and time again after a disaster happens, that they struggle, that they were fine before, but that navigation afterwards when the systems are upset and you don't know where everything is that you need it to be, they really, really struggle with that. And so we know that's an important population that we have to continue to keep track of and support as they make those tough decisions about what their next steps are. In times of disaster, the American Red Cross stands as a beacon of hope, and we rely on that hope and compassion to take care of every American that gets impacted because of a disaster. And we're equally committed to supporting our older Americans. In fact, 40% of our volunteer population is over 60. That's neighbors helping neighbors. That's the best outcome you can have because they understand the hard and difficult road ahead, and as a volunteer, they can speak with credibility and help understand and identify and empathize with those families as they begin their recovery effort. Their service reflects the value and the dedication of our organization, and our older Americans, they aren't just recipients of our help here. They actually help and facilitate and empower our communities to help ourselves. So on behalf of the American Red Cross, first of all, thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this important issue, and thank you to our donors and our volunteers who show up every single time we call to go out and deliver that Red Cross mission. Thank you, sir.
And you have to raise money to do a lot of this, right?
Yes, sir, we do.
Thank you, and thank you for what the Red Cross does. Next, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand to introduce the next witness.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I want to introduce our final witness, Mr. Luis Vance Taylor. Mr. Taylor is the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. In this capacity, Mr. Taylor works to ensure that older Californians and Californians with disabilities are not left behind during disasters by striving to guarantee their inclusion during the emergency planning process. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much for having me. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, members of the committee, it is an honor to testify today. I do so not on behalf of any government agency, but as a subject matter expert in the field of emergency management who lives with a disability and uses a power wheelchair. We, as has been said, are in an era of increasingly frequent and severe disasters. As the scope and scale and devastation associated with those events grows, it's critical that we recognize that wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, they strike without regard to geography or politics. They consistently and disproportionately, however, impact older adults and people with disabilities. One reason why we see that disproportionate impact is because well-intentioned emergency managers who can walk and see and hear have oftentimes developed plans in isolation without input from the full spectrum of the communities they serve. I activate in response to major disasters. And one time while visiting an emergency shelter, I saw survivors, and they're there on the worst day of their lives. It was hot, muggy, ash from the air clung to their sweat. It formed a thick brine that covered their skin. Because the jurisdiction hadn't integrated the provision of portable accessible showers, when older adults and people with disabilities arrived, they couldn't bathe. And I'll never forget the look on their faces when I had to tell them that they had no choice but to sit in their own filth until we could bring in the appropriate resources for them. Experiences like this should serve as a call to action to embrace inclusive planning. As a best practice, forward-leaning emergency management agencies are ending the practice of planning for the community, and instead they're choosing to plan with the community. One vital step is creating access and functional needs advisory committees that ensure better outcomes for the whole community. Inclusive planning leads to press conferences with ASL interpreters, posting of critical updates in accessible formats, the provision of accessible evacuation resources, and shelters that are physically and programmatically accessible. When the whole community is involved in planning, the result is a system that hears and sees and serves everyone. And more than that, it's a system that literally saves lives. California leads the nation in inclusive planning. And yet, I'll be the first one to say the work is far from done. We have resources to develop innovative practices and training, and we share those resources freely with states across the country. But as valuable as those tools are, when disasters strike, what communities truly need is sustained support from federal partners like FEMA, ACL, and ASPR. They need funding for the full range of federal resources required to respond to and recover from events that overwhelm local capacities. Cutting or eliminating those agencies would have devastating consequences for especially older adults and people with disabilities whose safety, independence, and survival often hangs in the balance. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, members of the committee, you have an opportunity to affirm that the mission of inclusive emergency management is one of the most human responsibilities we share. To show that Washington can be counted on to empower emergency managers in the whole community, to lift the hands that hang down, to reduce human suffering, to prevent the needless loss of life among older adults and individuals with disabilities. Doing so is a reflection, of course, of who we are, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans. And it's a lift, but you don't have to lift alone. Federal agencies will lift with you. States across the country will lift with you. I will lift with you. And as we lift together, the communities we serve will ascend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Now we're going to go to questions. And first, Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand. I have to commend our chair again. He always seems to be on top of timely issues as it relates to our seniors. And once again, I mean, we have dealt with everything from opioids to, and now we're dealing with disasters for seniors. So thank you so much for having the energy and the diligence to follow through on making sure we're delivering on this topic. It's so important, especially to our state. We have such a large senior population. In fact, in my former role as Attorney General, I went to a field hearing where Senator Scott hosted in the villages of Florida, and that was such a great event. And who would have ever thought, as the newest U.S. Senator, that we would be sitting here as colleagues discussing aging and issues related to older Americans. So thank you so much for your support since I've been here and for your remarkable leadership as the chair of this committee. And thank you for the 2 Floridians that came all this way to join us for the hearing. Very much appreciate that. As Attorney General, I was a fierce fighter for our seniors, went so far as to set up a senior protection team, enlisted the help of law enforcement and our civil lawyers. One of the things, and certainly law enforcement does a remarkable job of communicating with our seniors as a disaster, or as a hurricane is approaching or a threat is approaching our shores, making sure we're evacuating them, those that will evacuate. Law enforcement coordination and proactive leadership is just incredible in Florida, and I thank you, Sheriff Naco. But one of the other things I commend Florida law enforcement for, and I want to make sure that we're doing this across the nation, is recognizing that the seniors after the storm passes and the crimes that occur, oftentimes you have to be specially trained. You have to be aware that when a contractor comes in and demands cash payments from our seniors, and they willingly hand over large amounts of money, and then they never return to do any work, or when someone gets a senior to sign a power of attorney and then takes their benefits without ever doing anything in the best interest of that senior. I mean, to some extent, what used to be, I think, thought of in law enforcement as a contractual or civil issue, we are now bringing around law enforcement in Florida to say, no, in many of these instances, this isn't a contractual dispute. This isn't whether a contract term was delivered on or we followed through on a specific agreement as we agreed upon. This is outright theft. And law enforcement in Florida has really taken that on, and it's important that, yes, there are going to be contractual disputes in recovery process. Anytime you're going through a large recovery process like we've seen in Florida, that will happen. But in many instances, it's these fly-by-night scam artists, criminals. I had a sheriff call me frantically one time talking about how someone had demanded $30,000 to trim a senior's tree, and they were about to hand it over. But the sheriff had to come in and go after those folks. So I appreciate the proactive leadership. And Sheriff Naco, you have been at the helm and leading your county admirably through these storms, protecting seniors. Have you seen similar crimes like that? And do you... is there anything that you think we can do federally to encourage law enforcement when it is a crime and it's outright theft, of being more proactive in the aftermath of a disaster?
Thank you, Senator, and appreciate it. First time officially saying general, saying senator, so congratulations on your new position. So you hit a very good point, the fact that, and it goes to a lot of things that what people are talking about is that senior citizens, when they come to Florida, they move from all over the country. They're used to snowstorms or anything else, but they move to Florida and they're not used to hurricanes. And the fact that the family, may be out of state. And so there's a lot of things that the family can do to prepare their loved ones for hurricanes. We always tell them, make sure they have a plan in place. Hurricane, make sure you tell your loved ones where they are. But what's often forgotten is what you brought up is the fact afterwards. What happens when there is a tree in your yard? What happens when you have electrical damage, things that happen? So you make a great point. One of the things that within the Pasco Sheriff's Office, we're blessed with great members, we do unlicensed contractor stings. In those unlicensed contractor stings, right after the storms, we'll do them too, because we recognize and we know that people come in from out of states and different areas of the state to prey on these senior citizens. So it's the education piece that we can do. From the federal level, we're always happy when federal partners come in to assist us, because the one problem that we see from a local level is that we may be overwhelmed, whether the lights are on different areas and providing security, the linesmen from different power companies are coming in, and so we're providing security for them. But the more it frees up the local law enforcement to protect the senior citizens or any citizens from these unlicensed contractors, that would allow us to be more proactive out there rather than being responding because we're being reactive to the storm and the issues that occurred from the storm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Mooney. Senator Gillibrand.
I'm going to defer my time to Senator Kim.
Thank you. I believe we have Mr. Taylor virtually, is that correct? Okay, great. Well, look, thank you all for joining up here. This is something that I've thought about a lot. Before I came into the Senate, I was over in the House of Representatives, but I represented a district had part of the Jersey Shore, but also had some of the largest retirement communities in the country. Folks that probably spend half the year down where the chairman lives with the snowbirds. But it was very important to really recognize both the issues in terms of disaster preparedness and response, but be able to tailor that in particular to an older community and understanding what their needs are. And so, Mr. Taylor, I just wanted to start with you, if you can hear me. In your work with the California Governor's Office, can you share about the importance of involving older Americans and individuals with disabilities in our disaster planning? How important is that, and what was it from your own experience that you can shed light on for the rest of us to consider?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Senator. Thank you. So you really hit the nail on the head about the need to involve not just older adults, but people with disabilities in the way we plan. So emergency management is bigger than any one group, organization, or agency. The fact is that in order to help the whole community, we have to include the whole community. So one of the practices that we see being most effective is the development of what we call AFN advisory committees. These are groups that have community-based organizations, advocacy groups, community representatives that all come to the table to plan with emergency managers. So emergency managers can find out about how well do our plans when we're discussing things like communication, sheltering, evacuation, response, or recovery. How well do those actually meet the needs of the community? And the perspective is invaluable, in part because we're having a diversity of lived experience. So I use a power wheelchair. Anytime I enter a room, I'm scanning that room for access. Are there ramps? Are there stairs? Can I get around? But chances are, if you walk into that same room, you probably aren't looking for those same things. And that's okay. It's not that one's good and the other's bad. It just means that based on our individual lived experiences, we each have a different perspective. And so we can look at the same thing and see it differently. So bringing these access and functioning advisory committees together with emergency managers makes sure that we end up with a better product.
So
that
these
works.
are advisory committees that would sit down or meet with the emergency managers to be able to give feedback into that. And then what is the loop back? Like how does then information get back to the larger community of seniors, people with disabilities? Because that's one of the harder things I felt like we saw in terms of just getting that information out there and best to be able to communicate. I don't know if you have any best practices, Mr. Taylor.
Absolutely. One of the challenges that emergency managers have is we don't know everybody in the whole community. But when we partner, let's say, for example, with Centers for Independent Living that are serving individuals with disabilities, when we partner with area agencies on aging that are serving older adults, they're able to take these plans that get developed and help make sure that water gets to the end of the row. Because you can have the greatest plan, but if the end user doesn't know how to utilize it, then it's a missed opportunity for safety,
Yeah.
security, and independence.
No, that's right. And one thing, I know my time's running out, but we had with FEMA before, they provide courses on inclusive emergency management. We've seen this both in person and online, and we've seen just over the years, the in-person courses stopped, and now the online trainings have stopped. I think that we should be revisiting some of these types of tools available for people to understand how to put their safety and security first, how to be able to be connected in. And I think this committee could potentially shine a light on these different tools to be able to get the word out. And with that, I'll yield back.
All right. Thanks, Senator Kim. Sheriff, how has your personal experience as well as the state's experience with disasters made your department better equipped to prepare for senior-focused emergencies?
Thank you, Senator. I believe, with the experience that we've had throughout the years, unfortunately, we've had a lot of hurricanes, a lot of issues where we had emergency management have to respond to these calls. I think with our senior population, there's numerous things that we're consistently, it's the messaging through TV or through the radio where we're constantly going out there. I think one of the best things we do is we send our deputies into neighborhoods. When you send your deputies into the neighborhoods and you start talking neighbor to neighbor to say, hey guys, please get out of here, it's time to leave, it gives them a personal perspective to understand, because I get it. It takes a lot to have to evacuate. There's misnomers of shelters. They all think it's Katrina again. They think they're going to the Superdome, and they believe that's what they're going into, and they're fearful of that. They don't want to go into that. It's not until it's too late that they say we have to leave and get out of the situation. So I think it's going out there personally, having deputies just walk through the neighborhoods, talk to people, can tell them, hey, look, we have deputies at the shelters. This is where you can go. That has been the greatest impact, because we can get on TV, we can say what we want, it doesn't matter. We can get on the radios, we can say things, get those messaging out there, it doesn't matter. It's not until you're face-to-face with somebody and you explain to them and then you tell them the stories of, let me explain to you. And I'll tell you, Senator, a very quick story. When that water in 2023, as I mentioned in the notes, the water was flowing super high. It was coming up in this house. It's one-story Florida house, and you've seen numerous of them as we've gone to after the storm. The water was rushing up super high. I'm going in there. It was us and fire rescue going house to house, knocking on doors, getting in there. And there was a husband and wife, elderly couple. Then you can see the water rising over the kitchen table as we're in there. We're like, we got to go. We got to get out of here. And they're like, well, I need my medicine. I need this. And then I need my cat. Where's the cat? And there's a cat jumping on top of the refrigerator over here. I mean, it's almost, if it wasn't sad, it was almost comical seeing law enforcement and firefighters trying to grab this animal, because we knew they would not leave without their pet, and we were going to get them out of there. We finally get them out of there. But I tell you that story and the fact that we tell those stories to people that do not want to evacuate and say, look, you can stay where you are and you have that constitutional right and the God-given right to stay in your house. But we are warning you, if you stay in your house, we may not be able to respond quick enough to save you.
Yeah. Mrs. Pippa, what unique needs of older Americans does the Red Cross prioritize during disaster preparedness and response?
Thank you for the question, Senator. There's a couple of areas that we focus on. One, and I think we've hit on this a couple times, is meeting the older Americans where they are and making sure that you have readily accessible and easily consumable training to help them prepare themselves. Unfortunately, in a lot of places, we find that folks are not open to preparedness messaging until they've been impacted by a disaster. They tend to be much more receptive to it after that, which is an unfortunate circumstance. And so we do want to capture them. And if we've had 5 hurricanes in Florida over the last couple of years, it's important to then take that opportunity. At the same point, it is sharing stories. It's helping folks understand. It's also older Americans teaching older Americans, right? If I send a 23-year-old in to do a preparedness for older Americans, I don't know that that's going to land as well as if it's a fellow older American who speaks with authenticity and credibility there. So that's a major part of it. It's also really important that we know that there are caregivers out there. We want to make sure that the caregivers are well prepared, that they can take care of themselves and they can take care of the patient in their charge. Too often we see folks dropped off at American Red Cross shelters that might have had home health care, but they're then presented at a shelter and they don't have any of that support that comes along with them, right? So making sure that we get them connected back into their communities. But thinking about the caregivers and the burden and the pressure that they feel as well to take care of these older Americans if they have to evacuate, thinking through that process and helping them plan for that. And then the most important thing is talking to older Americans and asking them how they want to be prepared. How can we best communicate this message? How do we get it the last 10 yards? And sometimes it's brute force. It's door to door, convincing people to take good preparedness actions. Sometimes it's somebody sharing their own personal experience to help prepare people so that they are not impacted in the same negative way.
Thank you. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Thank you. Mr. Vance Taylor, I've been working on a strategic plan for aging for a while in the last Congress. My bill amends the Older Americans Act to require the Assistant Secretary for Aging to award grants to states, Indian tribes, and tribal organizations to create or implement strategic plans for aging and aging with a disability. In 2024, it was reported that 10 states have a strategic plan for aging, 6 states have authorized a multi-sector plan for aging, 21 states are interested in or actively planning multi-sector plans for aging. California's plan was introduced in 2021, and California has the 4th largest economy and has financial resources that other states do not have. So can you talk a little bit about how the California plan for aging has helped ensure that disaster preparation considers the needs of older adults and people with disabilities and functional needs? And also, do you think that other states need federal support to implement their own strategic plans for aging since they don't necessarily have the same resources that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, a core aim of any master plan for aging is really to ensure that older adults, people with disabilities, can live independently in the communities that they choose. But reaching that goal really does require more than the traditional public health approach, right? It demands a disaster preparedness strategy that reflects today's threat landscape. So California's master plan takes a whole community approach, right? Engaging state and local agencies alongside community organizations to integrate safety and independence into inclusive emergency planning at really every level. While California provides a strong model, many states, to your point, lack the resources, staffing, or technical capacity to follow suit. So without federal support, they simply cannot build or implement strategic plans for aging that meet these critical needs. So every state has older adults, every state has people with disabilities, and every state faces disasters. This really is about safety and dignity and independence, and it requires a sustained local and federal investment.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges for older Americans or people with disabilities who have language access issues? One of the things that, one of our challenges in New York State, where's the camera? So where should I be looking when I'm addressing Mr. Taylor? Do we know? Because if I look there, I feel like I'm not looking at him, so. Do we know where the camera is?
I see you,
Backward.
Senator.
Okay, okay. Oh, I see where you are now. Okay, good. So we had a lot of trouble during one of the natural disasters in New York when there was massive flooding. And because we didn't have enough communication in multiple languages, a lot of the senior citizens died because they didn't evacuate from basements where they were sleeping, or they just didn't get out in time, just as you described, Sheriff, and how this happens. So I've advocated for the expansion of language access for the wireless emergency alerts. Can you speak about the importance of ensuring the alert systems are accessible to older adults and people with disabilities and functional needs?
Yeah, that's huge, right? If you don't know what's coming, then you can't train, you can't prepare, you can't be safe, you can't be secure. So we had one incident where it's the middle of the night, there's a wildfire, a big debate about, hey, should the jurisdiction alert or not alert? They don't want to create panic. Uh, they don't want to congest the evacuation zone. Ultimately, they chose not to. What got lost in that discussion was what the impact was going to be for individuals in that jurisdiction who were deaf. Because when deaf people go to sleep at night, they put their phone under their pillow or on their body.
Mm.
That way, if an alert comes in, it vibrates and they wake up. But the alert didn't go out, so the phone didn't vibrate, and so they slept as fires raged around them. And for some of them, by the time family and friends were able to reach out, it was tragically too late. So at the end of the day, this issue about accessible alerting in formats and languages is about whether people live or die,
Yes.
right? Whether they're safe or left behind. They have to know what's coming or they don't have a chance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Senator Warnick.
Thank you, Chair Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand for holding this important hearing. Ms. Pippa, I want to start by thanking you for your service at the Red Cross. In your roles with the Red Cross, is it your experience that older adults face unique risks during disasters, particularly related to evacuation, medical care, and communication?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. Here's what we see a lot of times. Folks tend to believe that they can rely on their family that's local to help them as well. That is not always the case. There have been experiences that I've had where I've visited an older American in a shelter, and I've asked him how he's doing, and he said he's okay. And I said, well, how's your family? Where is your family? Well, they're local too. Well, were they impacted? They were. Well, how come you're here at the shelter and your family is not? They didn't have enough room for him. That's a heartbreaking situation, both for that older American and for his family. They're all trying to recover. And so we know that older Americans look to their families, look to their neighbors, look to their friends to help as well. And they want to return back to the home that they came from. And sometimes that's possible, and unfortunately, sometimes that's not. And when you're reliant on a standard schedule or a repeatable day-to-day activities, and a disaster takes that away from you, it challenges you from a cognitive, from a physical standpoint. And so we see older Americans really struggle to make better decisions after for their recovery, to put them in a place where they can access the resources they need. We all know that recovery is a long, long journey. It is complex, and there are lots of pieces to it. To be able to knit that together for yourself and help yourself navigate through that is something we see older Americans struggle with. That's where we use our casework and our volunteers to walk alongside them, to make sure that they've connected with their doctor and gotten an emergency refill on their medication. If they had a medical assisted device, how do we help them acquire that again and get them back to the independent living that they so desire at that moment in time? So understanding that critically, pairing them with medical professionals that help make those decisions and help them navigate that situation, as well as our caseworkers, is something we do, and we're seeing it happen more and more and more, and we're seeing more older Americans turn to us to help us navigate that system because their families sometimes cannot.
So given that experience, would you agree that robust investment in disaster preparedness can make the difference, maybe even between life and death, especially in communities with aging populations?
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks take for granted that they can evacuate quickly. We have to be thinking about older Americans, about access and functional needs, and about what they need in terms of support to actually heed that evacuation order when it comes, or when it's a no notice that they have to evacuate quickly, that they're able to. It's critical.
Yeah, well, Hurricane Helene killed nearly 200 Americans.
Yes.
And I've fought so hard to secure over $600 million in federal funding for Georgians and their communities to help us recover, rebuild and better prepare for the next storm. These storms are coming more frequent, they're getting stronger and stronger. And that's why I'm so alarmed by this administration's plan to gut FEMA and federal programs that help older Americans prepare for disaster strikes. These aren't just budget choices. They're, in fact, as your experience bears out, a matter of life and death. Just last month, the Trump administration canceled a $30 million flood reduction grant for my hometown of Savannah, Georgia, that would have saved $180 million in post-disaster recovery costs. But they killed the program or canceled the $30 million grant because they said it was too focused on the climate, even as we see these storms get stronger and stronger. That means senior citizens in Savannah, including my mother, are now less protected from deadly floods just because Donald Trump doesn't believe in climate change. Ms. Pippa, in your experience at the Red Cross, when seniors are isolated during a flooding disaster like the flooding Savannah was trying to prevent before the Trump administration canceled their funding, how does that isolation amplify the unique risks seniors already face during a disaster?
So seniors count on their social network and their connectedness to their neighbors and their families. And if that is torn away from them and if they're left in isolation, we see them struggle. Simple day-to-day tasks like taking your medication on time or things like that. And even when they come to American Red Cross Shelter, we see the same thing. We have disrupted their lives. They are not prepared for what is coming. And this is absolutely critical that we help position and educate these folks so that they are the absolute best prepared and that their community members are educated so that they can step in and help as well. Because it doesn't just have to be the American Red Cross, it has to be all of our nonprofit partners who can step up to the table to help.
So thank you for all of your work in disaster preparedness and working with our seniors.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. Sheriff Knuckle, what are the biggest challenges law enforcement faces when evacuating or assisting older adults during a disaster?
Thank you, Senator. So the nice thing is partnerships, especially at the local level. I will tell you, Fire Rescue, Pasco Fire Rescue does a phenomenal job if there's somebody who cannot get on public transportation, and public transportation will go to people's houses. So when you're talking about emergency situations, you're talking about preparedness, the local government is the heart of where it happens at. We're blessed to have partners like the Red Cross and everybody to come in, but your local government is the one that really does it because we know the community. We know what's going on. So, when there's people that want to be evacuated, we go, Fire Rescue will go out there, or if they can walk and they can move on their own, then Pasco Public Transportation. The thing for law enforcement is that we go into security neighborhoods, we'll make sure they're safe, because that's the other thing that, especially we see that with our senior population, they are so scared to leave because they think people are gonna break into their houses. And so that is something that, from our standpoint, from law enforcement, we start shifting our deputies to start working what we refer to as Alpha Bravo, which is 12-hour shifts, because we understand a big part of evacuations, a big part of leaving is that peace of mind that their house is gonna be safe. Another great lesson learned is especially, our populations is to turn your power off when you leave that house. But I can't stress enough, we talk up here, and I appreciate from a federal standpoint, how can you help? The biggest thing from us is that we emphasize that emergency management starts at the local level. We know where places are, we know where people need help, and we can speak to them from a common language because we live there. And I will tell you from an example of recovery, of search and rescue, where when you bring in federal partners, they're great to have, but at the same time, they don't know our community. And so the National Guard was deploying on their vehicles, going out to different areas, and we were telling them, you need us in the trucks with you, because if we don't ride with you, we can't tell you where the low-lying areas are, where the flooding areas are. So I can't emphasize that enough. As you talk about emergency management, as you talk about federal assistance and federal help, and how can the federal government assist us, it's by supporting the local government, because we know what we're doing, we've done it enough, and we know our communities.
So can you give me an example of how local partnerships, for example, churches or veterans groups or community centers help protect seniors during a storm?
Senator, that is a great point when you talk about the partnerships, especially with the faith-based community. We always talk about the word trust. They trust the deputy. They trust us to go out there when we tell them it's time to evacuate. They'll trust fire rescue. They'll especially trust their church, the members of their church, to say, shelter here. If we want to look in for the future about where we can spend federal resources, it's strengthening shelters, the schools, but even the churches, because the churches can make great shelters. They just need generators, they need hurricane impact windows, they just need to be built up a little bit. But you want to talk about the trust that they will say, I will leave my house because I trust the law enforcement will protect it, but I trust my church. I'm a part of my church, and you know what? They're going to get support, because that is a heartbreaking story when you hear that somebody's in a shelter and their family lives down the street, but they're not going to have them. Well, the other part of their family is their church. And if they are there with their church, or there with their synagogue, they're there with people that they trust, that's going to allow them to leave, because it's almost like a community meeting together, and they're going to support each other, they're going to love on each other, they're going to help each other through this disaster.
So when we've opened up shelters in Florida, has it been successful to have the National Guard there on top of local law enforcement and the Red Cross and others?
Yes, Senator, the more we can bring resources into those shelters, the better off we are. The National Guard is even more successful when they're deployed with us, because we put deputies in the shelters. I will tell you, those shelters turn into little cities. The Pasco School District does a great job feeding them, housing them. Law enforcement's there to protect them. Fire Rescue started this program where they stay in there too, so they have medical assistance. And when the Red Cross and everybody's there to support them, it's great because it builds that community. And so it's a great point. The National Guard, we thank them for their services coming down to assist us when the storms occur. We love it when they're more flexible, because sometimes, and this becomes a bureaucratic issue, their mission, if their mission changes, it becomes a whole storyline to try to get them to help you to do something, because they have to change their mission. You talk about one of the things that beyond, and I know it's not on this committee, but this affects all of us in law enforcement, fire rescue, emergency first responders. It's the reimbursement policies from the federal government. FEMA reimbursements, I will tell you, is a disaster. And that is an issue that we consistently deal with. And it goes back to the local levels. How can you support us on a local level? It's streamlining operations, getting that funding there quicker, and allowing us to help those shelters, like you said. The more we can make those shelters more desirable to go to, the better off we are. And the one thing, too, is I know people want to leave that shelter immediately as soon as the storm's over. They can't, are the winds down? Can we leave yet? And we tell them, we got it, but let us go back and make sure it's safe to go back to where you came from.
Ranking Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pippa, you know, we've heard a lot of stories about what happens during the disaster. And I've met so many older New Yorkers who just have lost everything. What do we do for them after they've lost everything? How do we try to make sure they can have independence if they've lost their home, as you've said, if they've lost their church, as you've said, if they've lost their animals, if they've lost their medicine or their license or their credit cards, like just existing without all the things that keep you in your home and independent is very difficult. What advice do you have for this committee about assuring these seniors can have independence after a disaster?
Part of it is making sure that as you move from that response to that recovery kind of continuum, is that there is an infrastructure in place that can help support them and move forward. We see folks present a lot of times at our shelters if the healthcare system has been compromised. It may not be that they can't stay in their home, but access to medical professionals and supplies and personnel is something that drives them actually to show up at an American Red Cross shelter, not that they can't stay in their home anymore. As we move them through that continuum and we help them find their next step on that recovery journey, making sure that they're reconnecting with the work and the folks that were helping them beforehand, because they tend to get disconnected and they have a hard time reconnecting with that person or that entity to help continue move them forward. That could be social service entities, it could be faith-based entities that help, it could be a local senior center, right, that they come to and they report to. We have to understand the makeup and the fabric of that community and then work with those specific entities, either local government or nonprofit, to make sure that they're robust enough and they're stable enough that they're ready to take care of those folks as they continue to move forward. Mm-hmm. We will take care of them and walk with them through their response and recovery journey, but we're not experts in all those fields. We have a well-defined mission. There's so much more beyond that that these folks need. We need to make sure that we are not leaving before that infrastructure is in place so that they can continue their recovery. They don't slip through the cracks as they continue their journey.
Have you ever used or heard of, for either the sheriff or Jennifer or Ms. Pippa, of before a disaster asking older Americans or anyone, frankly, to create a plan? Like, when you're about to deliver a baby, you pack a bag, and the bag has everything you're going to need for 3 days. Do we ever tell older Americans or people with disabilities, pack a bag, have it ready, have all your medicines in it, have all your phone numbers in it, pack your wallet, pack your identification, pack your passport, or whatever IDs you have, put them in a go bag by the door, so if there needs to be evacuation, you're ready? Like, does that ever happen before a hurricane or before big storms where they think there might be flooding? I mean, I've tried to help my parents, particularly my father, who's in Florida, who doesn't want to leave his home before a hurricane. He wants to ride it out every time. And obviously that creates enormous anxiety for his family who are trying to get him to leave. But in those instances when he doesn't leave, is there a way to get them prepared before?
That is my lived experience with both my in-laws and my parents as well. And to the sheriff's point, it's about, even if their home is destroyed, they want to get back afterwards to protect whatever might be recoverable, and they just want to understand. I think for us, it's really important to make sure that they've got that kit. For some folks, that's a financial burden, right? And so if you're asking them to put 3 days of food aside and water and excess medication. And so what we also try to do is kind of incrementally chunk it out to say, you don't have to build your go bag today, but let's have a plan over the next 4 months that helps you acquire the pieces of that bag so that you're not experiencing that financial burden of putting the go bag together. The other thing we do a lot of nowadays, and I actually do this myself in my go bag, is I have a list of things that are might expire, and so they may not sit in my go bag, but that list sits at the very top of my go bag, and that is the first thing I look at to make sure I have to pull those items in and put them in the bag.
You are super prepared.
Well, it's
I
kind of
think you
job
might
security.
Even be a prepper.
Yeah.
Sheriff, what are your thoughts on that? And then, Mr. Thomas, I'm going to ask you the same questions.
Thank you, Senator. So it is a great point, and lessons learned throughout the storms. So I understand that many Americans have routines in their lives, and especially as they get older, the routines, that's what they live by, is my routine. And so to disrupt that routine, to say have a go bag ready to go, make them feel uncomfortable, as we explained to them, saying the needs for it. But we actually do that. It's a great point, because we do that before the storm. The nice thing about hurricanes, at least, is we usually get several days' notice of that they're coming. So that's what gives us the ability to start saying things. And so we say build that go bag up. Go to the pharmacy. The pharmacy will usually give you the extra drugs because they understand that, during a storm, right after the storm, those convenience stores, the drug stores may be down. So we say, go get your extra drugs. The one thing which we often tell people, make sure you do not forget, because they always will, and it's their lifeline, is their charger. They will remember their phone, but they'll forget the charger. So we say, make sure you bring your charger. Make sure you have several days of clothes. Make sure you have those phone numbers. The biggest thing that we also tell people is make sure you tell your loved ones where they are, such as in your case, having your father in Florida, you're out of state, is that this is where I'm going to be. One thing that we face, and I can imagine the shelters face this later on after we get the calls, is they don't know where their loved ones are. They may have gone to a shelter. Well, then the first thing they do is they call a welfare check. So they call the sheriff's office up, during the storm, right after the storm, say, I can't get a hold of my loved one, where are they? Even if the winds are high, even if we can get out there, it's how we are and what we're built of to go out there into those worst case scenarios to find people. So you're putting people's lives, first responders' lives, at risk by not telling them where you're going. So that's actually part of the kit that doesn't go in the kit, but it's part of your planning process, is to tell people where you are at all times, because people are nervous, they're stressed, they're out of state, and I can imagine they watch the news, which makes them even more stressful. So that's part of the Go Kit, but 100%, it's one of those things where we're out there pushing that message, because I go back to stories where water starts rising, we don't have time, and we just say, have credit cards, cash, medicine, and your charger, let's roll. And then we take them out the door, and those are the type of situations that make it better for first responders if people have those Go Kits ready.
Mr. Taylor, if you could answer both the questions. The first one was, how do people with disabilities and older Americans reestablish their independence after a storm? What are the tried and true practices that you've seen that work? And then how do we engage our seniors to prepare better before a storm? So if they are being rescued in the middle of the storm because the water's rising, they have the key things they need, like their phone, their charger, their medicine, the phone numbers they'll need to call someone.
Yeah. So, if we're talking about after a disaster, how do they get their lives back together? We, I think, have to look at the incredible role that partners like FEMA, the ACL, uh, play in that capacity, right? Because it's when they go to a disaster recovery center and they're able to apply for those programs that are going to benefit their lives, not just in terms of things like perhaps rental assistance or other needs assistance, but it's really their first major step to getting into that recovery process and system. So that's absolutely essential. If we're looking at before the disaster strikes, then we're going to look at things like training, right? Because you're exactly right. People forget their chargers. You know what charger they forget? Their wheelchair charger. I can't tell you how many times I go to a shelter and people say, I don't have my wheelchair charger.
Mm,
Because of course they're leaving and there's not time to think of everything. So
yes.
we have to engage them beforehand.
Yep.
And that comes through training. And one of the things that we see is when we train with the whole community on these specific items, that message gets socialized. Everybody does better,
Mm,
but not every jurisdiction is well resourced. And so that's when things like grants, especially from federal partners, play a really key role because there are tried and true ways to empower older adults. There are tried and true ways to empower individuals with disabilities, but it oftentimes requires a certain level of investment that not all jurisdictions can bear on their own. So I think promoting those best practices is essential. I think part of it is just having a bold goal, right? That it's 2025, so we're no longer going to accept that people are going to die in their homes simply because they lack the capability or capacity to run for help.
mm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Van Saylor, what tools or technologies do you use to reach older adults who may not be digitally connected?
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about technology. I haven't traditionally considered myself to be an older adult, but if you talk to my daughters, they will say, based on my technology challenges, I'm absolutely in that category. Um, we have to understand that there's such thing as a digital divide. First off, not everybody has access to smartphones and internet and apps, and everybody's ability to use those effectively is going to be different as well. And so, in order to make sure that we close that divide, we absolutely have to meet people where they are. And a big part of that is working with community-based organizations that serve older adults and serve people with disabilities, to help them navigate these processes, to put things together in plain language, to develop not just online trainings, which are great, but in-person deliveries as well, and to support the communities through everything from CERT type programs where we're conducting local trainings and knocking on doors. And for example, FEMA, when there's a major declaration, they'll actually go out and canvass neighborhoods, right? They'll go out and they will literally meet people where they are to make sure that they get the information that they need in order to be safe and secure and resilient. So we have to take a multi-pronged approach and take as many bites as we can at that same apple in order to move the needle in what I feel is a very meaningful way.
Thank you. Ms. Pippa, are there any Florida-specific initiatives or partnerships the Red Cross uses to assist our state's large senior population?
There is. We're working directly in Florida with a couple of different, I'm sorry, Senator, will you repeat the question again for me?
So is there anything specifically you do with our senior population in Florida that just, is our state any different? Do you have anything
Yeah.
that you, Red Cross is different in Florida?
Unfortunately, given that Florida's been visited by several hurricanes over the last couple of years, we've had the opportunity to refine some of ours and add some new pilots. One of the pilots we just added post-Hurricane Ian is we have a program that allows us to install free smoke alarms in homes if they need them in order to save a life or prevent injury due to house fires. We know that the 10 minutes we get in that person's living room is gold in terms of education. And while we want to educate them on how to evacuate their home during a house fire, because that's our most frequent disaster, we now combine that with in-person education about the most likely disaster that that family is going to experience. And in Florida, it's disasters. So there's a special kind of, think of it as a curated piece of that program that is specifically directed towards families based on the type of disaster that they're most likely going to have. We developed that as an outcome of some of the findings we had in Florida, with the feedback that we got from the communities about how to better prepare. And now we're not only using that there, but we're using that along all of our hurricane states to help better prepare our families there.
Thanks. Ranking Member Gillibrand, do you have anything? Go ahead. Are you done?
Yeah, do you want me to do my closing statement?
Yeah. Yeah, you can do yours and I'll do mine.
Well, I just want to thank you all for this excellent testimony. We have a lot of work to do. I feel like we have covered a huge amount of topics. I want to thank you for the hearing, Chairman Scott. I think we learned about the importance of inclusive disaster preparedness strategies, how to improve outcomes for older adults and people with disabilities. We also discussed the importance of safeguarding federal resources that allow states and localities to create and enact robust and inclusive disaster response. Our current trends cannot continue. We have to do better, and I know we will do better, especially with the information we gleaned from this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank our witnesses. Look forward to working with our members across the aisle and down the dais. If any senators have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, the hearing record will be open until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and this was very informative. Thanks.